Now, believe it or not, the main reason that most of us fail at seduction is actually because we misunderstand what seduction is. You see, human beings are animals, and because we are animals, it means that we also fall prey to the same things that all animals fall prey to. Hence, in nature, there tends to be predators and there tends to be prey. Gazelle are prey animals. Tigers, lions, they're predators. Yet, when it comes to human beings, because we're highly advanced, we're actually both. Human beings are both predator and prey. It all depends on the circumstance. For example, in the workplace, the owners, the CEOs, the management, they are the predators. And this is why they're always in a minority. They are a minority because their job is to exploit the workforce. If you're just a worker and you have no one below you, you have to understand you're a prey animal within the context of the human game of life. Now, in terms of seduction, if it is you who is after someone else, then it means that you automatically take the role of the predator. As the predator, you have to think like a predator. If you don't think like a predator, you won't be able to predate, whatever. You won't be able to predate on others, on the prey animals, as it goes, because men have acquired the dominant role in terms of relationships between men and women. It is usually the man who takes the role of the predator, meaning that he's the one who instigates the move. He's the one who gets it all going. And the women play, historically, the role of the prey, which means that women don't tend to go after men since they have acquired the role of the men. Nietzsche actually had a name for these two roles. He had the master morality, and morality is best understood in modern terms as a mentality, the mentality of the master. And the predator morality he called the slave morality, which is to say that whenever there is a creation of relationship between two sides, it can be between two individuals, but it can be between two sides. Like you have the management and then you have the workforce. So the management acquire the predator mentality, which is the master mentality. And the workers acquire the prey mentality, which is the slave mentality. As such, if you wish to seduce someone, you have to approach as if you are a predator, as if you are the master, the dominant source. But if you approach with timidity, if you approach someone as if you're not really in control and you're just begging for some type of connection, then you're bound to lose, because this is the game of life. The game of life is about winning and losing, right? So if you want to win, you have to behave like a winner. Hence, in terms of building relationships, and this applies not just to sexual relationships, not just relationships between men and women. This applies to all types of relationships, right? There has to be an instigator, someone who makes the first move, someone who approaches, someone who says the first word, someone who makes eye contact first, right? The person who wishes to begin the relationship, they have to be the first one to instigate, which means that it is naturally expected by our biology that the person starting the attack has to behave like a master, like a predator. There is a caveat, though, however. You see, when organisms and animals and human beings, right, when we encounter each other, right, this is game theory. Understand, I'm talking to you from a game theoretical perspective. As soon as we encounter each other, it triggers a survival response, a trauma response, of which there are 8 responses. And depending on which response you trigger, the prey animal, the slave, the person being seduced, that person will acquire one of 8 characteristics. And this is actually out of their control. They cannot control it. You feel how you feel. This is why they call it Nietzsche, right? So, whenever you begin your seduction, you have to understand that you will trigger one of 8 trauma responses because it is a traumatic experience. See, in nature, when you encounter another animal, a strange animal, a foreign animal, an animal that you don't know, you don't know if your life is under threat. But the same is true when it comes to human beings. When someone that you do not know comes and approaches you, you don't know what to expect. And so whether you like it or not, a trauma response is automatically triggered. The 8 trauma responses, they dictate how you should approach the person. But you have to be aware that they exist. Otherwise, you cannot use them to your advantage. And this is where most people go wrong. In terms of seduction, what they do is when they approach someone, they trigger a trauma response, right? And that trauma response takes over. The person can no longer think. It doesn't matter whether the person likes you or not. You could be the most handsome man in the world. The woman in front of you could be absolutely in love with you. But because you don't know each other, as soon as that man opens his mouth, a trauma response will be triggered. And the female, the person on the receiving end, they may not be able to overcome this response, which means that they may act in a way that they themselves did not want to act. The 8 survival or traumatic responses are fight and flight. These are the main 2 that everyone knows. Fight means that someone will fight against you. So if you approach a woman, right, and she likes you, but you trigger unknowingly her fight response, you're going to be met with a great deal of resistance. The woman may even tell you to F off or to leave her alone. I don't want to talk to you. Even though she may actually find you attractive, even though she may actually want to talk to you, but the way that you approached her, you unknowingly triggered her fight response. And now the only thing that she can do is fight you away because her body, her biology has taken over. You know, there's 2 forms of thinking according to the psychologist Daniel Kahneman, right? Thinking fast and thinking slow. You should check out his work, his book. But basically he says that there's a first form of thinking, system 1 thought or way of thinking, and it automatically takes over most of our lives, especially if our lives are under threat, which means that you would start to think, your subconscious mind will take over in ways that you actually cannot control because it's system 1. Systems 2 is a slower form of thinking. This is the conscious type of thinking. This is the kind of thinking that we are ourselves aware of. However, system 1 is the master. If there's a competition between the 2, system 1, automatic thinking, will take over, which means that if you approach your target in the wrong way and you trigger her system 1 form of thinking, which would be her trauma responses, she or they will start to behave in ways that they themselves cannot control simply because you have approached them in a threatening way. As a man, that's just not very difficult to do. You see, the fact that men are naturally bigger than women and stronger than women means that men automatically trigger a traumatic response. And it's usually fight or flight, which means that the lady in question will either look for a way to exit the situation as quickly as possible, flight, or she would be rude. She would have some sort of resistance. Everything that you say, she would counter, fight. And this isn't in her control. The other survival responses include, because I cannot remember off the top of my head, let me have a look. There's freeze. Some women and some people in general, they actually freeze. Nothing comes out of their mouth. And I've had that experience myself, that you're talking to a lady and you think to yourself, wait, I thought she was interested in me. She gave me all the eye contact, gave me all the signals, but by the time I actually spoke to her, she didn't say much in return, to the point that the interaction came to a abrupt and swift end simply because there was nothing there. You said something, you came with your opening line, and sometimes they don't respond, or they respond in a very short and abrupt way, and they may even come across as looking uncomfortable, but it actually isn't their fault. It just means that the approach that you took triggered a survival response. Another response is fate. And you see, oftentimes when women have been violated by men, you often hear that a woman may say that, she fainted or she froze and she didn't know what to do. And unfortunately, sometimes women have got the blame because people ask the question, why didn't you fight back? Why didn't you run away? Right? But it isn't their fault because a trauma response has been triggered and there was nothing that they could do. The system one way of thinking, automatic thinking, kicked in, and suddenly it just caused them to freeze or to faint. The other response is fawn. As far as I know, fawn is like you start to behave like a friend out of fear. And this is a response that men actually often see around other men. Like when a man is far more stronger and powerful than the other, and the men around him are afraid of him, they start to fawn over the guy, which means that they become very agreeable. Everything that the guy says, they try to accommodate. But women do this as well. They fawn over men or over other people that they feel naturally afraid of without realizing what they're doing. And this is actually a survival response, the fawn response, which turns or sees people become really friendly for reasons that they themselves cannot understand. But deep inside, it's just a way of the biology, the natural human instinct kicking in to try and ensure survival by fawning, by befriending someone else. There's a survival response called feed, whereby someone might offer you food or drink. Hey, this happens often in bars and situations where someone might bump into someone else and spill their drink or something, or the person says, I'll buy you a drink. I didn't mean it like that. Or I'm sorry about this. Let me buy you a drink. And they try to feed you. They try to give you food or something to try and squash the situation. There's a survival response called flock, whereby flock means that you flock to other people. You look for strength in numbers because you're behaving like a prey animal. This is how prey animals usually survive in nature. This is why you see animals in the African savanna moving together, because they are flocking. Birds are famous for flocking. They're moving together out of fear, not necessarily because they want to be surrounded by others, but in times of fear, people flock. And we see this in nightclubs and bars where women tend to go out in groups if they can. But it is actually a result of the survival response of flocking, since it is well known that we can often find safety in numbers. Believe it or not, fornicate is another one of these survival responses in which the person feeling afraid may suddenly become very sexual simply because they want to survive. And if they think that by having sex with the person who is threatening them, their survival will be ensured, this survival response triggers a sexual response that some people cannot actually understand. And he actually explains the phenomenon of one-night stands, because oftentimes people are attracted to those who they feel afraid. So the phenomenon of women saying that they love bad boys, right? Part of it is that, yes, you see the strength and you see that the bad boy is somehow the opposite to you, but that turns you on for reasons that you can't understand, but it's actually a survival response. So these trauma responses, they call them the 8 Fs. So we have fight, flight, freeze, faint, fawn, feed, flock, and fornicate. Obviously, to a man who can trigger the fornicate response, that's a huge advantage. But hey, in the world of STDs and unwanted pregnancies, this is only a recipe for disaster and for trouble. In any case, the whole point is this. Whenever you approach someone for the first time, you will trigger one of these survival responses, these trauma responses. Ideally, you probably would want to trigger the fawn, which is the friend, if you don't want to get turned away, because the others are actually quite negative, apart from fawning and fornicating. Yet, there is another way. The key here, if you want to master seduction, you need to try and find a way to approach people without triggering a trauma response. Because if you can go under the radar without triggering a trauma response, then you're more likely to succeed, or to at least obtain the outcome that you are looking for. Hence, when a man approaches a woman and says, "Excuse me, can I talk to you for a second?" You've already triggered a trauma response because she doesn't know you and she's feeling stranger danger. Stranger danger is a real thing. And also, approaching someone with so much politeness, "Excuse me, can I speak to you for 1 second?" That's not really how people talk to those they know. That actually puts you on edge. Just ask yourself, is this how you would speak to your brother, to your sister, to your colleagues, to your family, to your friends? In order to avoid triggering trauma responses, you must approach your target how you would approach anyone else. You must speak to them how you would speak to anyone. And the way to do this is to approach them by being natural. You see, you have to be like a ninja. You have to look at your surroundings. Check out the situation. What is going on? Right? So then when you break the ice and you approach them, it has to be done in a way that seems natural, in a way that doesn't arouse suspicion, and in a way that is welcoming. Yet there is a caveat, because although we trigger trauma responses in others, the situation can also trigger a trauma response in us. And this is the reason that men no longer approach women, because men of today, they're not as brave as the men of yesterday. If we look at our grandparents, they were fighting in the Second World War, in the First World War. You understand what I'm saying? They lived during times where the police wasn't so powerful and so controlling, where people were more violent. There were more knives and guns on the streets. And so our ancestors, they didn't have the fear that we have. But because our parents and ancestors have built such a safe world for us, we're not used to the dangers of the world, which means that when we approach someone, the trauma response is not triggered on them, it's triggered on us. Hence, when a man sees the woman that he wants to approach and cannot summon the strength to speak to her, it's because he has summoned the trauma response of flee, of freeze, of faint. He's fleeing from the situation. He has frozen. He feels like he's going to faint. His heart is racing. Suddenly he might get into a fight with someone else because instead of approaching, they have an urge to fight back as if they were being threatened, even though they're not the ones being threatened. And so to approach someone, to speak to someone, to seduce someone, you have to avoid triggering a trauma response in the target, and you have to avoid triggering one in yourself. So how do you do this? Well, that's where I come in. That's where the game theorists come in. That's me, right? You have to approach by looking for an opening, by studying the environment, so that when you finally approach, you're not arousing or triggering a survival response in yourself and in them. I'll give you an example, right, from my own personal life. This is probably the best way to understand this. There was this one time I was at a bus stop and there was a beautiful woman that I wanted to speak to. She was all dressed to the max, and me being myself, I'm not dressed to the max. I'm just casual as usual, right? So the way that I broke the ice, I studied the situation, what was going on. I saw that the roof was leaking right? And there was jobs coming down. So I said to the ladies, excuse me, the roof is leaking. You might want to move out the way in case it lands on you. And then she looks up and she said, oh my God, thanks for letting me know. And then from there, she's not feeling threatened by me because I did something that any human being should do for another human being. It's very normal to say to someone, actually, you know what? You might want to move out the way because the roof is leaking. But by the time that she said thank you, then that gave me an opening. She's not feeling threatened. I'm not feeling threatened. And like the conversation can go on from there. I must have said something along the lines of, I see you've made a big effort with your outfit. So boy, you don't want to get that messy at the last minute. And then she starts laughing and the conversation just rolls from there. But see, the beginning, the opening line, that's the most important line. That's the one that it's either going to trigger a survival response or is the one that's actually going to break the ice in a natural way so that the person is not alarmed and you're not alarmed yourself. Another way could be, I'm using examples from my own personal life. You know, the lady, again, she must have been waiting for her train, had her newspaper open. The platform was full of people, and I just said, any good news in that paper? Because it all seems to be bad news these days. And then she said, oh no, it's all bad. And then from there, it started, and I was able to begin my seduction because the thing that I said was relevant. She has a newspaper. She's reading her newspaper. And it's something that actually people do all the time. It's very normal to be in a social circumstance and start a conversation about something that's actually happening. Now, if I was to say to her, excuse me, can I talk to you for a minute? You look stunning. You are so beautiful. Oh my God, where are you going? That's only going to trigger a survival response, a trauma response in her, because she's thinking, who the hell is this guy? And the fact that I've said you're beautiful, now what do you want from me? Because you see, the words that we speak, they say a story, that the words we speak tell a story that is far bigger than the words themselves. So as soon as you say to a woman, I think you're beautiful, right? She's going to interpret this as, I would like to have sex with you. How do I go about it? Now this is going to trigger a survival response. Hence, I remember this one time, I must have been waiting for the train somewhere, and there was a lady walking down the stairs, and there's a couple of guys, probably 3 guys, tough guys, you know, strong guys. They look like they should have no problem, you know, talking to women. One of them had his shirt off, muscles out here, and as the lady's walking down, he stopped and he said, excuse me, can I just tell you that you're absolutely beautiful, right? The whole platform was packed full of people. And the lady was like, oh, thanks, I guess. And then she quickly walked off. And after the line that he said, he kind of looked a little bit embarrassed, right? And continued walking, which meant that he triggered the survival response of flee. And she fled. And in himself, he triggered the trauma response of fight because he did it in an aggressive way. So he's fighting, being aggressive, thinking, you know, this is an opportunity for me. And the woman is fleeing. Now, as the woman fled and finally found somewhere to stand, I approached her from the side and I said to her, does that happen to you a lot? And she could not stop laughing. She was like, oh my God, I can't believe it. She said to me, that was so embarrassing. And look, I entered with a killer line because I said something that was relevant to what had happened, right? And it made her feel relaxed. And then she triggered into flock. You know, she saw me as a safety in numbers. She felt safe around me, as in maybe I'm defending her from the guy who just, you know, although he did not intend to, just intimidated her. And she could not stop talking and talking and talking because she wanted, she was befriending me. She was fawning over me because now I made her feel safe. So then that's how I become my strategy of seduction. And it worked for me. I used him as a decoy. I saw the same woman coming down and I waited to see what the events were playing out. She was in movement Where is she going? Is she walking down to meet someone? Is she in a good mood, in a bad mood? I was analyzing the whole situation. But the other guy, spur of the moment, because his friends were around, he thought he'd be brave and just jump into it. He had no strategy. I had all strategy. It was all game theory. I used him as my opening. And this is how you master the art of seduction. You have to start thinking about the trauma responses, and you have to think that you're going to trigger them in yourself. So it's a two-way thing, right? You want to approach in a way that doesn't trigger the trauma response in your target, but also that in a way that doesn't trigger them in yourself, because once you've triggered them in yourself, you won't be able to act or react. Like the guy who triggered the fight response in himself. From that, he could not calm down. He just became even more aggressive. And the more aggressive he became, the more that the lady wanted to run away from him. She wanted to flee, he wanted to fight. And I came from the side. Anyway, hope to see you in the next video. There is far more to learn. This is just the beginning.